Hey everyone, it's Caleb with InklingsFiction.com again, and I am back with you guys for part 2 of the Get Her Done series. Part 2. Today's Get Her Done is Let No Second Go to Waste. As you can see here, I've got a clock with a little highlighted section here for the seconds gone by. So, the question is, what does this have to do with getting a book done? I mean, obviously, seconds is time. Does that have to help anything? Well, seconds, as I'm sure you know, are a measure of time, and seconds stack up. Seconds stack up into minutes, into hours, into days, into years, And odds are, I know it's going to sound really harsh, but odds are if you've been working on your book for 8 years, 10 years, 25 years, and especially if your book is only like 20,000 words long, odds are you've wasted a lot of seconds. Odds are that you've done so unintentionally. You've done it with every good intention at heart, but you're wasting seconds. And it's not entirely your fault either. You're wasting this time because you don't know any better. You don't know how to write a book. You haven't written a book before. Wow, imagine that. So, the question is, what can you guys do to not waste your time? Let me just list off some random things as they pop into my head. So, the first big thing that I knew for a fact slowed me down was editing as I was writing my book. You're supposed to edit out of the wazoo when the book is done. I never knew that. I sort of understood cerebrally, it's like, oh yeah, I shouldn't edit something until it's done, huh? Imagine that. But as you're writing your book, you just feel like, oh, I have to edit. I have to make sure it's perfect as I'm doing it. Don't do that. You're wasting your time. And evidence of that is you've edited those 20,000 words that you've written 100 times by now. And every single time you spent hours and hours and hours doing it. Don't. Please stop doing that. I understand that a certain amount of editing is required. For me, I like writing as well as I can on my very first pass through. Personally, I find that I have written more and more. I find that I edit less and less and less because I've gotten better at mastering the art of writing. By no means am I actually a master, but I'm definitely a whole lot better than I used to be. And that's just something that you'll get down as you write more words. It's not as you edit more words. I mean, that will help a little bit. But the biggest thing is writing. Write. I mean, I know some authors, and they say, oh yeah, you will not be an expert at writing until you get how many words written? Is it 10,000, 20,000, 100,000? Maybe it's your first 2 books? No. A lot of the authors I've talked to say you will not be an expert at writing until you've written 1 million words. 500,000 words is the low end of what I've heard, maybe even 300,000. But I've heard upwards to 3 million words written. You will not be good at writing. You won't be an expert at writing until you have 3 million. I've heard people say that, and it's wow, that's a lot of writing. And since that's a lot of writing, that's a lot of time, which takes us back to let no second go to waste. The thing about every single second is you can write a word a second, roughly. I mean, I know I can write more sometimes and less in others. So it's really something you have to play with. But at the end of the day, it really depends on how you write, you as an individual, because we all write differently. All of our brains work completely differently. So you really have to just sit your butt down in your seat, put in the butt and seat time. Seriously, just put in the time and just write. You can write trash. You can write great stuff. You can write whatever you want. Write fan fictions for all I care. I don't care, but what matters is you have to write, and you have to keep on writing until you figure out how you, as an author, write. What is the best way that you write? Do you plot out 1,000 things over 5 hours and figure out exactly how your story's going to go down first? Do you just write and then eventually figure out where your story's going? For me, that's sort of how I do it. I'm a more or less complete pantser. I mean, sometimes I'll write down some plot points or story ideas, but I'm more or less like a complete pantser, and I just write as I go. And I tried plotting out, but it just slowed me down so hard. And a lot of me is well, how am I supposed to know what happens next? I don't know my characters yet. So for me, I get to know my characters by writing my stories. And then once I write, say, 10,000 words into a story, I have one story I'm writing right now that is actually about space pirates, and I didn't really know my characters very well. In my first 10,000, I think I'm at 20,000 words before I had to hit pause for another series that required work. But I was 20,000 words in, and I finally was okay, I think I understand how this character works. And the thing is, if I was just plotting, I wouldn't have figured that out. I wouldn't have figured out who my character was. So by putting in every single second that I could into just writing the story, I ended up having, first off, a good chunk of my story written. I mean, I know 20,000 words isn't a whole lot, but it is for some people. But I got a chunk of my story written, and I know my characters, and because of that, and because of just going around living my life and coming up with ideas for the story, I basically have the rest of my story more or less thought up on how I might go about doing it. I mean, I don't know for sure if that's how I'm going to go down, but I sort of have that idea. So that is something that you have to do to get your story down and make the most of every second, is just don't let a second go to waste by editing. Don't let a second go to waste by just wasting time on ways that don't help your author brain, because once again, our brains all work differently. So I mean, what one author recommends doing isn't going to be what another recommends doing, and neither of them might work for you. So at the end of the day, you just have to figure out what works for you in your writing process. One more thing that I recommend doing to figure out how to not waste time is do your research for your book when you're not putting in the time of writing your book. So I know a lot of us have scheduled out time on when we are going to write our books. Say we might do it before work or after work or at midnight when we wake up randomly. So please do not waste that time researching stuff. You can put in like 5 minutes here and there to research, but that comes with a big issue of you're hopping on the internet, you'll get distracted. I know I do. I know a lot of us do. And writing a book, it's not always the most fun thing. I mean, odds are if you haven't gotten your first book done, the reason is because you've gotten distracted at least 5 million times. And something that I find is very distracting for me is doing the research, because eventually I'll start going down a bunny trail and then another and then another, and then I'm like 5 miles in and I'm like, all right guys, I got a conspiracy theory here about how this works. And they're like, how, what works? Well, this thing in my book. They're like, you have a conspiracy theory about your book? Yeah. And it just sort of like goes down the rabbit hole and you feel a little crazy, and you're like, once you're all done, you just look at all your work you did and you're like, I just wasted my entire day. What have I done? So what I recommend doing, guys, is like you can go and then like type in brackets, do research on how platypuses build a dam. I don't think they build dams, but just do something random like that, like on what you need to research, like maybe make it bold, like in your thing, and then keep on going on. Like if it's something that you have to know before you continue on writing, you can do that. But like if it only has to do with like a couple paragraphs, so say you have a character who just had their carotid artery get sliced and they need to figure out a way to survive, you can actually have it so you figure out exactly how they can survive later on, because odds are that's something that's just going to take a few paragraphs. So just skip ahead and continue writing your story. If you know that your character survives, then you can continue with them surviving. Or if you know that they're going to die from getting their throat slit, you can have them die and continue writing your story. You can come back later and fill in all the technical know-how, and I think that's the best way to do it. So when do you do this research? Well, I know for a fact we all like looking up stories on our phones sometimes. I mean, we all spend all this time on Facebook and whatnot. And what if you spent that time, instead of being on Facebook and whatnot, what if you spent that time doing the research that you already had to do? So for me, I actually like on my Google app, my Chrome app on my phone, it lets me have multiple tabs open. So I will actually research stuff for my book. So as I'm writing, I'll type in the search, and then I'll turn off my phone to get back to the search at another time. Another thing comes up, I open a new tab, open up another search for that new thing I needed to figure out. And basically I just put together hours and hours of reading that I eventually need to do, put it all on my phone, and when the time comes, I'm able to go back to it, and with the passage of time, I've come up with some new story things, and I come up with more and more things that I need to research, and that is how I like to do it myself. I mean, of course, not everyone's going to be this way, but I highly recommend that you guys at least try out doing it this way. The reason I've come to this is because I've written so many words. I actually got a notification from my Grammarly. You guys should probably get Grammarly. That's another thing for saving time, but my Grammarly, it notifies me for how many words I've written, and I actually passed the 3 million mark a few months ago. So, I mean, I'd like to say that I at least know a little bit about how to write a book, because I've written a couple books by now, so that's something that I highly recommend, guys, is be sure to make your writing time just writing time. Don't just waste your time doing 100 other things. Another thing that I find very hard for me to make the most of every second for is I like to have multiple tabs open as I'm working, and sometimes I have Facebook open as I'm writing my books because I have the Inklings Fiction community on Facebook, the Inklings Creatives page, and I'll probably link that below. But I have that page, and the issue with that is it's a page I have to take care of, and because of that, I like to keep the thing open so I'm there for whenever anything happens. But what I find is, as I'm writing my book, I get a notification, ding, 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 like every few seconds. So I have to hop onto Facebook. I'm like, oh, this person has an issue. Oh, this person messaged me, and like all these things. And it just pulls me away from my writing. And they actually did a study, and they said that if you get distracted, it takes 15 minutes about to get back into the flow of your workflow. And for me, when I have those multiple tabs open, I basically will never get back into the workflow. So I like to close down all the tabs I can. I mean, I know some people who actually turn off the internet on their phone and on their laptop and all these things and basically go dark whenever they write, just so they never get distracted. So you might want to do airplane mode. You might want to try that out if you get distracted too easily. Odds are the world is not going to burn down in the time that you're not on the internet. It could, but I mean, if it burns down, it burns down. Whoop-de-doo. But yeah, that is another pro tip. There are so many other things that I can say right now, but at the end of the day, guys, just really spend some time thinking hard about, all right, what am I wasting my time on? It's like you do some pretty serious soul searching, and then you realize, how many hours of my life have I wasted on this thing? How many hours of my life have I wasted on this? And at the end of the day, you might want to cut some of these things out permanently now that you finally are aware of all the time that you're wasting. And at the end of the day, also, you'll figure out how many more things you can get done because you aren't wasting your time. So I hope that helps you guys a whole lot. I know it helped me when I started keeping track of what I was spending my time on. So let's stop wasting time. So get that story written. Stop wasting your time. Keep track of what you're doing. Write on, and God bless.